have you ever wondered why some people are super successful while some others cannot even get out of bed? Today with me is a specialist in motivation, I would say, Miss Chetna. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I am Chetna, and thank you for having me here. I am a
Pleasure.
clinical psychologist and a psychotherapist, and I also work as a habit coach with a health and fitness app called Gabit. And I also have my own practice, where of course I work with clients with clinical issues, non-clinical issues, motivation, performance, relationship, burnout, stress recovery, all of that. So yes, this is what's been pretty much about me, and I'm also a parent. So, looking at my child grow up is also teaching me a lot of things about how motivation works.
Okay, so let's
Yes, yes.
start with the basic psychological concept of motivation.
Right, right. So, motivation is your internal desire
Mhm.
to do or perform a certain activity, or to engage in a certain activity, or to perform an activity that leads to achievement of a
Mhm.
goal. So, motivation is basically your desire to achieve a goal
So is it
in a very
always,
simple term.
yeah, always from the inside?
Not necessarily. It is also from the outside, something we call extrinsic motivation. Although ultimately, the idea of, so when we say internal and when we say external,
Hmm.
the weightage of the external motivation also depends on a lot of internal factors, right? Like
Right,
what
right,
will what I decide as a reward, an external reward might not be an external reward for someone else.
right, of course, of course.
Who they are, where they come from.
Yeah.
Every individual is different, and so is their way of looking at the world, and so is their way of looking at what rewards them. So, but
Mhm.
yes, there are internal factors and there are external factors as well.
So would you say that intrinsic motivation is a better way for people to drive people rather than extrinsic?
Depending on what the goal is,
Mhm.
depending on sustainability as well. We
Mhm.
do see that internal motivation is, of course, very, very important for sustainability.
Mhm.
लेकिन lack of, और या तो अगर external reward में या external level of motivation में external factors में difference आ रहा है, तो हो सकता है internal motivation कितनी भी क्यों ना हो, no matter how high the internal motivation is, changing factors in the external way
Of
can
course.
also kind of override the internal
Right.
motivation, then
Right.
it go down. So it also depends on the task.
Mm.
Like I said, definitely depends on the internal motivation, and then depends on the external and the changing frequency, intensity,
Mm.
uh, weightage that we play on the kind of on the external factors play on us.
Right. You might have an intrinsic motivation to work or volunteer at the charity place, but obviously there's a certain amount of money that you require, so that extrinsic motivation is needed.
Absolutely. And then let's say I have a family to feed.
Mm.
So then, although I do want to volunteer and I want to give in like 5 hours a day, but there's a full-time job that requires 9 hours a day. And I know
Mm.
that I need to feed a family and I need to pay my bills and I need to have a certain kind of a lifestyle. So then those external those external factors will have more weightage than my own internal way of
Mm.
volunteering. So maybe that 4 hours a day will probably go down to 4 hours a week,
Yeah.
right? Or I'll find
Right.
other ways to do the same thing. Or I might even lose that in the process. We see so many times, right? People have these hobbies and passions and interests, and they realize
Mm-hmm.
for years they've not touched it. For years they've not engaged in hobbies, even though desire to hai karne ka na, motivation internally hai that I love dancing, or I
Mm.
love playing an instrument, or I love painting. But they'll be like, I don't remember the last time I did that. So that's also because so many other factors are
Mm.
playing a role in that.
So, how sustainable would you say that motivation is? Because we all had New Year's resolution plans, but not all of them subsist. So, is motivation for a particular duration?
See, again, motivation is eternal. Motivation is not something you can take away from human beings, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's a desire. Motivation to be able to, let's say, pay bills, like, or the motivation to eat, motivation to go out, motivation to become a better version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at theories of motivation as well, right? Like how psychology talks about it, they've divided into two, three various ways in which we talk about motivation. So one is content. What is motivation? What are the types of motivation? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Mm-hmm.
is an example. McClellan's theory is an example where they talk about growth, where they talk about relatedness, where they talk about achievement, where they talk about self-esteem, related motivation, and then of course Maslow's the very basic survival, right? Then there is also process theories of motivation where they talk about what is the process of how motivation works. So this way we've also classified into, and then the cognitive factors that play a role in motivation. So ऐसा नहीं है कि कभी भी motivation नहीं होती है. There's always a motivation to do something or the other. Then it's when the desire doesn't match the drive. So how I explain it in very simple ways to my clients is that there is an intent. That intent is what the motivation is. So there's a desire that I want to do this. Then comes in an action. So intent should lead to action. वो बीच वाला process है where a lot of people struggle with how. So Chetna, I have an intent, but I'm not able to get an action out of it. Now, what are the factors that act as barriers? So think of intent as your motivation. That's the desire. Then we need drive, which is the arousal. So drive is basically defined as psychological arousal that leads to action. But that drive can get influenced by a lot of factors. The desire to be able to take an action is influenced by a lot of factors, which varies from individual to individual. So ऐसा नहीं है कि motivation is an internal, it's an eternal thing. It exists in everyone, just that in different people it's different. So I can't say if I'm motivated to do these things, you should also be motivated to do this thing. If I'm motivated to top my class, doesn't have to mean all the other 30 students in the class are motivated to do the same.
Yeah, makes sense.
For some people, it could be I want to become a musician, so I don't care about becoming a plus grader or a 100 on 100 scorer in mathematics.
Okay. So if anyone in the audience wants to get motivated and actually achieve something, want to achieve the desired output, what advice can you give them?
I think first is to write down goals, right? What is my goal? I know there is a desire to do something, but what is it that I want to do? Which is why when we talk about goals, right? I don't know if you've heard about it, but a lot of people must have heard about the SMART theory or the smart ways of setting goals. Something we call, if you want to set goals, make sure they follow the SMART rule, which is their specific, measurable, achievable, time bound, reliable. So this way we have to make sure that the goals are set in a certain way. So the first step is always to set goals. What do I want to achieve? Why is setting SMART goals important? Because it reduces ambiguity for the brain. आपके ब्रेन को गोल से रिलेटेड जितनी ज्यादा एम्बिग्विटी होगी उतना कम मोटिवेशन होगा. So your brain doesn't like ambiguity, and your brain doesn't like uncertainty, and your brain doesn't like unpredictability. तो उसको कम करने के लिए, to reduce that, which is why we need to set goals in a specific way. We need to specify. We need to tell our brain, अरे करना क्या है? मुझे बड़ा आदमी बनना है. Like for example, I want to become a successful person.
Yeah.
But what is the definition of a successful person?
Yeah.
For me, successful person could mean something very different. For you, it could mean something very different. So if I want to become a successful person, I need to specify that a successful person would mean, let's say, buying a house for myself. Now, how would I get there? Then dividing it quarterly, 6 monthly, weekly, that kind of goal, just so that my brain has less ambiguity. Yeah. Buying a house is a goal, but it's very ambiguous because I still haven't told my brain, I still haven't told myself how I want to get there. So that also kills motivation. Or that the motivation is going to be there, but the drive will not come. So the intent is there, but the action isn't happening. So I'm still waking up with motivation, but I'm not doing anything about it.
Could you be more elaborative about the distinction between drive and motivation?
Okay, so motivation is an internal desire. Think of desire. मुझे ये चाहिए. I desire to be a successful person. Drive is the arousal. Arousal means changes in the psychological state. For example, excitement, anxiety, nervousness, all of these are arousal states. कि जैसे मुझे अभी एक काम करना है, let's say I want to become a successful person, is my desire to be a successful person. Then comes in the arousal that I wake up, I make a schedule, I get a 9 to 5 job, I fix my salary, and I turn up to
Right.
work every day. I work hard, I perform well, is all drive.
Mm,
So motivation leading to drive.
mm,
So that's the state of arousal. कि
mm,
मैं अपने आप को उठा के काम पे लेके जा रही हूँ, काम कर रही हूँ, स्ट्रेस से डील कर रही हूँ. आई एम ऑल्सो नर्वस, आई एम ऑल्सो एंशियस,
mm.
I'm also excited to take up new challenges. So that arousal state is drive.
Is it possible to motivate someone who doesn't want to be motivated in a specific area? For example, child in studies.
It is actually, again, totally depending on one, how much insight the child has as to why. See, if we're also looking at a child, so children don't have a very big view of the world, right? Their view
Mhm,
of the world is very, very small. So when we're trying to motivate an individual, whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, it's important to take into perspective what is their worldview. पहले तो to understand how are they, why do they think academics are not important. One. Two, it could be that they're distracted. Three, of course, there's neurodivergence, which we also don't take into consideration. It's not that मुझे करना नहीं है, मुझसे नहीं हो रहा है.
mm,
I'm unable to figure out what interests me. This particular set of academics and this particular way of schooling doesn't interest me. So let's find out ways to make things interesting for them. So once we figure out what the barriers are, and if we systematically go on about removing those barriers, working through those barriers, having necessary help, of course we can see the levels of motivation changing. I don't know how much of that way, because it varies from person to person. But of course, these are some of the factors we can take into consideration. Then, of course, the socio-economic status, where they come from, observation. So, see, motivation and drive is influenced a lot by conditioning as well.
mm,
सो रीइंफोर्समेंट, कौन से बिहेवियर को पनिश, किस बिहेवियर के बाद पनिशमेंट मिल रही है, किस बिहेवियर के बाद अप्रिसिएशन मिल रही है. व्हाट एम आई ऑब्जर्विंग इन माय एनवायरनमेंट, what are other people doing, how am I seeing other people looking at life. So all of that also is very helpful when we're trying to
mhm,
motivate, which is why we tell people, read about role models, have good role models, surround yourself with
mm,
good people. And which is why so many schools have buddy systems, right? Like where they have a child who needs motivation, so they will assign a buddy who's
mm.
also helping them, motivating them. So different ways of doing that. um, okay, could you just repeat the question? Sorry, I missed it.
Yeah. So if a person wants to have a very good physique, but they are not able to see the results, they're going to the gym every day, they're working hard, and it's causing frustration. So how can they be motivated to stay focused towards their goal, to go to the gym still, even while frustrated?
Right. I think it's a very good question, because we see a lot of people, dealing with the same kind of dilemma and the same kind of doubts and same kind of questions. Is that मुझे रोज scale पे changes नहीं दिख रहे हैं मुझे, I'm not able to see the desired changes every single day. So I
Mhm,
think here, yes, we constantly need a feedback system. So a lot of different types of, like when we think about types of motivation or areas of motivation, we do require immediate feedback.
mm,
Now, here, when we start a health journey, especially a weight loss journey or building a physique journey, it's very important to have set milestones
mm.
or set like landmarks. Think of it like making a map and then having landmarks. So
Right.
instead of looking at it on an everyday basis, when we know that there are changes, for the external changes to show, it's very important for the internal changes to happen.
Mm,
Now the internal changes might or might not happen according to my way, even if I'm doing everything correctly, because my body also has its own ways of responding. So different days, stress levels, sleep, all of that matter. So having very realistic expectations. I also read this somewhere, when we have unrealistic expectations from ourselves. So what they said was, when people have too high expectations from
mhm,
themselves, the resilience goes down.
mm.
Now, here we are not talking about too high expectations, we're talking about unrealistic expectations. Now, unrealistic expectations could be seeing a change on the scale every single day,
Mm.
or seeing progress exactly the way that I've set a timeline to. because the timeline can shift according to different internal factors that you might not be aware of as an
Mm,
individual, but that are happening in your body, right?
mm,
Yes, my body is in my control. I'm eating correctly, I'm drinking water correctly, I'm doing everything correctly. Yet there are still some factors
mm.
that might not be in my control as to what is happening internally on a cellular level. Physique change is not just happening on a outer level,
Of
cellular
course.
changes are happening, right? And then body can take its own time. So it's very important to have, instead of an everyday feedback system, having a very realistic feedback system,
Mm,
which is why we say smart goals set करने चाहिए कि
yeah.
realistic है, time bound है, achievable है, और हम उनको track कर पा रहे हैं. And then having an expert guidance also,
Mm,
having a mentor also who can figure out where we are going wrong, and also
mm.
knowing that if you're doing the right thing, if
Right,
you're
of course.
doing it in the correct way,
Mm,
even if you're not able to see changes externally, it is not going waste. Just because you can't see it externally doesn't mean it's not happening internally. So you, for a while, you'll have to shift that external motivation to internal as well. That I'm still feeding and nourishing my body. I'm still nurturing myself.
mm,
एंड ऐसा कभी नहीं हो सकता कि हम किसी चीज को नरिश एंड नर्चर करें और वो आउटपुट या वो रिजल्ट नहीं देगा,
mm.
in if all the factors are taken into consideration and we're taking care of everything. So yes, it can become exhausting, but self-talk, progress checks, milestones, having a good mentor, reading about different people's journey through it and seeing, how they've overcome barriers, reading about plateaus. I think more information, good mentoring, good self-talk can help us overcome these
Right.
stages where we feel we're losing motivation.
My last question to you is how can someone contact you for the services you provide?
Oh, you can get in touch with me through my Instagram, which is that therapist in a white tee, and you can
Yeah,
as well.
I'll list it. What services do you provide?
So I'm a clinical psychologist, so
Mm,
assessment and of course management of clinical and
mhm.
non-clinical conditions. I'm a neurodivergent affirmative psychotherapist as well. So management of adult ADHD, relationship issues, stress recovery, burnout, abuse recovery. I work in all of these areas as well. In touch with performance, working around performance, managing leadership roles, um, and working through more than just clinical conditions.
It was tremendous honor to have you on the platform. A lot of
Of
insights
course.
you shared.
Thank you so much for having me.